this year seen the biggest change in the role, and CFO moving into a much more strategic role, and actually the whole finance and accounting teams moving up in terms of value creation.
What are the new things that are under the umbrella of the CFO?
The CFO always had a seat at that executive table, not always looked at as the co-pilot. In fact, a lot of times it used to be the marketing people that.
Tom Hood, EVP of Business Engagement and Growth at AICPA, is a globally recognized leader in the accounting profession. Tom has dedicated his career to helping finance professionals adapt to change, embrace technology, and develop future-ready skills. His visionary approach continues to inspire professionals worldwide to lead with purpose, innovation, and agility in an ever-evolving business landscape.
So the overhype trend is AI will replace finance and accounting. I'm around long enough that I was around when Excel came out, and VisiCalc, and Lotus. And when that came out, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal, of all places, that said, spreadsheets are going to replace the accounting profession. The CFO has a good command of all the data and the critical relationships in their stakeholder system. And so now they're playing that big role. And in fact, the number one pathway to CEO right now is through the CFO.
How do you bring all these pieces to a strategic level, especially when you think about AI and how it's going to automate these things?
Well, that's what's creating the urgency. So right now, the number one issue in our leadership group, as you know, is upskilling and reskilling. It's the need for new skills. And that's across the whole org. So what we're finding is...
Welcome back to the Diary of a CFO podcast. The finance leaders share the lessons, challenges, and wins that shape their careers as well as their organizations. I'm your host, Wassia Kamon, and today I'm super delighted to have with me Tom Hood. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Wassia, as always, it's an honor to be with you. And this is going to be a lot of fun, I can tell. And by the way, how many of our listeners have no idea that we had an accounting Hall of Fame? I should have a green jacket on, I guess, but...
Have it in the back. Absolutely. And I just really wanted to start with your career journey, right? Because you've been in the profession, you were a CFO decades ago. So I'm really curious to hear what drew you to accounting and finance in the first place, and how did you find yourself now where you are?
The thing that drew me to accounting was 3 letters, the FBI.
Oh, wow.
I'm the son of a Baltimore City policeman, and my mom was a key punch operator. So I'm the first generation in our entire family to go to college. I put myself through college at night school. And that was because, all I knew at that time was my dad was a police officer. I didn't want to be a police officer, but I thought I'd like to be in law enforcement some way and helping our community. And FBI seemed like the right way to go. Now, once I started getting involved, looking at what was involved, they required 20/20 vision uncorrected. I needed glasses or contacts. So unfortunately, that didn't pan out. So now I'm in night school, starting at Johns Hopkins University, taking accounting. And I'm realizing that I'm going to have to get a job as an accountant because that's the major I took and I liked it. So, all right, here we go. So that led to getting various jobs in corporate. So I never did any public accounting. I like to say I was a victim of audits, but I never did an audit.
I'm going to use that.
But I was encouraged and guided to become a CPA the minute I graduated from ultimately Loyola University is where I went to graduate with my accounting degree.
Wow. I would have never imagined you being FBI agent. So I'm glad you came to the accounting side.
Me too.
Yes. And I'm curious to hear, because you were a CFO for decades, and what would you say helped you break into the role back then? Because the CFO role has evolved so much.
Yeah. So I would say I was very fortunate. My early career days, I was in several major corporate roles. I started out as like a junior accountant in banking and finance, then quickly moved into architecture. So I was in a major global architecture company. At that point, I was a accounting senior, so to speak. And that's where I started to learn really about the role of the controller and the CFO. I had really good mentors there, and they encouraged me to get my CPA. And then as soon as I got that CPA, they said, you're going to write your dues check to the Maryland CPAs and the AICPA. And he literally sat in my office and made me write my own personal check to join those associations. And he said, now go out and get involved. And that set my trajectory. Well, see, it's three things that I think were my secret to success, and I would suggest that they might still be that relevant. And it's about getting involved in your profession. In my case, it was the professional associations, AICPA and MACPA. And the second part was building your network. And you're well aware of that. But if you look at what we're doing with future finance, that's what we're doing. And it's about the collaboration that comes from your network and the people that you meet who you might not know when they could be helpful or whatever, but you provide value and you get value. And that's one of the biggest keys. And I think we've lost a lot of that over time in the profession as we've gotten, COVID and all these other pieces that have happened. But creating networks, which is what we're doing with Future Finance, has been a big, big evolution there. And then the third thing was an insatiable desire to keep learning. And obviously, I've got my quote that says we have to keep our L greater than C squared. Our rate of learning has to be greater than the rate of change and greater than our competition,
Wow.
which could be a seatmate or it could be another company. But I think those three things, right? Getting involved, raising your hand, doing things in your network through your associations, building your network, and then collaboration through constant learning.
Wow. And this resonates so much with me because maybe I didn't tell you, didn't get a chance to tell you because you're always busy at the conferences. But you changed my life by those three things. And let me tell you how. So I'll tell the audience too. So a couple years ago, when I started posting on LinkedIn, I did a post about the top certification in accounting, and I missed one of them. That was very important. And so one of the other thought leaders on LinkedIn reposted it, and he just happened to be connected with Tom Hood. And so I was like, oops. But then you were so gracious to send me a message and say, hey, Wassia, I just wanted to tell you about this. We got to talking, and you invited me to the future of finance. At that future of finance, I met someone who eventually introduced me to someone else. And that's how I got my first VP role and now my CFO role.
That's incredible.
Right?
I did not know that full story, but I do remember that post and that conversation very well. And
Yes.
you were very gracious on the other side to say, "I'm open to listen to what you have to say," and then you helped me get it right, right?
Yes.
That was fantastic.
Yes, but it goes back.
That is so
I
cool.
know, right? Because it goes back to what you said, getting involved. So for me, it was initially through content creation, right? Trying to also get the word out that accountant can be in finance and FP&A, and B, that being a CPA didn't mean being restricted to public accounting, right? But
Yes.
also the networking, being willing to go to that conference and also meet people and keep learning all the conferences and the spaces, the challenging topics that I brought up. And so, yes, you changed my life.
That's so cool. Well, and you changed ours because that one meeting was when you, and a bunch of the other ladies created the sisterhood, as it's now known, by really uniting the ladies in finance, which was incredible, and that continues to this
Oh,
day.
yeah, we are solid. Going in our third year. So, thank you so much for creating those spaces. And I want to go back to, before we derail too much, because I'm too excited to have you on. I wanted to know, now that you are really in contact with so many Fortune 1000 CFOs, how would you say the role of the CFO really evolved? Because sometimes I feel like, is it overhyped? Did it really evolve? And how did it really change?
I think what's interesting is actually, I would say this year, we've seen the biggest change in the role. And I think it's because it's been building for we've been talking about this probably for a decade or more about the CFO moving into a much more strategic role and actually the whole finance and accounting teams moving up in terms of value creation. I think we're now finally seeing it. Let me give you a couple quick examples. Right now, we're starting to see the publication of this new role called the COFO, the COFO.
Yes.
Workday's using one. It's the combination of the COO and the CFO. What we're seeing is that CFO now is the co-pilot with the CEO of the whole organization's strategy. So we've been talking a long time about the movement from the rear view mirror view, closing the books and providing the financial statements to the organization to the windshield view where we're actually advising the organization of what to do. Now you start throwing in all the things that are going on now, ever since COVID, inflation, geopolitics, tariffs, you name it, right? But these are all forward looking things. And the CFO now has to step into that role and be comfortable being that high level strategic advisor.
Wow.
Now, I was lucky because when I was way back in those days, I got into a highway construction company and I was CFO at the age of probably about, I think I was under 30. And this is about a $500 million construction company. And we were in a major systems transformation and we went through a very disruptive time. And the CEO relied on me to help them navigate the future, constantly doing projections, going to the bank, meeting with the bonding company. That is what kind of crafted me. But that was a role that is the future. And I was occupying that way back then because I had to. It was right. It was about necessity. But that is the role that we now see more and more frequently from the biggest corporations all the way down to the middle market. And I feel like we're at the arrival phase. The inflection point has happened and we're now going into that role. And in fact, we're pulling the whole finance organization up with us by upskilling and reskilling, and AI is giving us a turbocharge. That's how I see that happening.
Okay. So how would you define then the role? Because typically when we think CFO, we think finance, we think FP&A, accounting, treasury. Like, what are the new things that are under the umbrella of the CFO?
So I think the biggest new thing is strategy
Okay.
and long-term planning and really being the co-pilot with the CEO. The CFO always had a seat at that executive table, but not always looked at as the co-pilot. In fact, a lot of times it used to be the marketing people
Yeah.
that were looking at the market, right? And while that's still important, without the understanding of the foundation of the numbers, you can't really advise those businesses. And so you're looking at times where businesses are having to cut costs, right? Pull that lever, but accelerate revenue. And that accelerating revenue requires that strategic, holistic view of the whole organization. The CFO has a good command of all the data and the critical relationships in their stakeholder system. And so now they're playing that big role. And in fact, the number one pathway to CEO right now is through the CFO.
Wow.
That's kind of cool, right? I mean, and when I look at the whole transition, Wassia, I feel like we're doing this. We're going from a past tense profession to a future tense profession. That's kind of exciting, right? Because we used to always be about the past, close the books, tell us what happened. Now we're looking at close the books, get it right, but then tell us what's going to happen and what happens after that. And that's the new role that I think we're all starting to take into.
No, that's very exciting. And I'm also curious as a CFO now, how do you bring your whole function with you? Like when you think about, going into the granular level, how do you bring AP, AR? How do you bring treasury? Like how do you bring all these pieces to a strategic level, especially when you think about AI and how it's going to automate these things?
Well, that's what's creating the urgency. So right now, the number one issue in our leadership group, as you know, is upskilling and reskilling. It's the need for new skills. And that's across the whole org. So what we're finding is they suddenly need, we like to call it the T-shaped professional, right? Those boundary crossing skills that are built on top of the strong accounting and finance foundation. So that's like collaboration, strategic thinking, storytelling, right? And integration of all that kind of understanding future trends. So those skills are where we're starting to see finance teams start to acquire. But even the control, if you look at some of the, I think EY did a DNA of the controller report, which I love, and it's showing that the controller is basically stepping into the role that the CFO used to do,
Wow.
which is taking more of a finance projection element to it, which is then elevating AP and AR that they've got to be. So think about applying AI for anomaly detection and risk and fraud detection. So now they're using new tools, which is allowing them to grow, which is kind of exciting. FP&A has always been a big part of that, but they're getting an expanded role in this age of uncertainty, which is getting crazier and crazier, right?
Yes.
So that's where that demand is. The world is getting more uncertain
Mhm.
and complex, which is requiring finance to be able to deal with that from a projection perspective,
Mhm.
which means you have to elevate the whole team to support that CFO moving into the co-pilot role.
Wow. And how do you see the timeline of it happening, right? Because the change is right now. The modeling that we're doing is not just best worst case scenario, is bad, worst, ugly scenario, I feel like. So how do you bring up like what is a timeline? What could be a roadmap for a CFO to get their team at that level?
So I think it's going to be up to each CFO, but we have a model called the finance assessment model for effectiveness, which basically shows a progression of the CFO from basically cost control all the way up futurist and value creators. And so it's up to them to find out where they are on that path. But our future finance group created that 3 years ago. And this past meeting, we're going to update it with the impact of AI. So I'm going to send you a link to add that to the show notes so you can give them this fame model to start looking at the different. So what we're saying, Wasia, is each individual CFO or company has to chart their own path. And some of them might be further behind or further ahead on the journey. So this model gives them a place to say, where am I and what do I want to move to next, as opposed to everyone trying to move to the far upper right. Because I think it's going to all happen at individual paces, even though I would say the economy and the environment is pushing that to happen faster. So I would say if you're a smart CFO, you should be looking at how can I elevate the role of me and the team to keep up with all this crazy stuff going on in the market. Obviously, AI being the next big catalyst. So the other part we'll give you is we just released a business resilience toolkit. So it gives you all kinds of resources to think about strategy, scenarios, risk, as you navigate all this uncertainty. So between the FAME model and the business resilience toolkit, you've got two resources you can give the audience that will give them some good ways of thinking about and mapping their journeys. Again, our hope is that everyone gets on the journey and we all start to elevate the whole profession together.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. I take it for granted being within the group, but I know this will be super helpful to so many leaders out there, especially when you think about how finance was viewed and how we quickly have to pick up things. So thank you for sharing that. Definitely looking for that link. And then my next question is at some point, in the accounting profession, within the CFO role, there was a time when being a CPA was a gold standard for finance leaders. Today, some people say that it could actually hold them back. Where do you stand on this?
So I think it can only hold you back if you let it. I would say that yes, there's no question that we've seen a migration. There's been more like MBAs and other quote credentials or degrees that have been more sought after. I actually think it's the CPA. In fact, it's the reason we merged with CIMA because the merger of CIMA, Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, and the CGMA qualification brought the discipline of management accounting into the CPA, which is missing. So when you start to look at the CGMA curriculum at the top strategy level where CPAs would enter to get that credential, it's all the stuff that they need to be that evolving CFO, and it will add to the CPA. So I think what the CPA gives that no one other credential gives them is the ethics and trust that comes with that designation. That's essential for that controllership function to this day in public companies. And for a CFO, it gives you instant credibility with your investors and your board that you've got ethics and integrity. Now you just need to layer on the heavy strategy side of being a finance leader. And then that will give you the skills that you and the credential that you need. So I say the gold standard is still CPA, but the platinum standard is CPA CGMA.
Oh, okay. So tell us more about the CGMA. Because again, back to the original post, by the time I learned about the CGMA, I was like, snap. I already had the CPA and the CMA, and I was like, I would have just gotten the CGMA just by itself. So please tell the audience about what is a CGMA, what are the parts, and how can someone go for it?
Okay, so the CGMA stands for the Chartered Global Management Accountant. It's actually in, I think we have it in about 120 countries. That's the reason the AICPA sought to merge with them, because we lacked the focus on management accounting inside the AICPA. And so CIMA, that's all they did. So then it also opened up a global market. And now we've got this big global market of CPAs and CGMAs. And I'll give an example. I was in India like 2 weeks ago, meeting with our major CPA firms that have offices in India, which there are a ton of them. And they were all saying, wow, this CGMA opens up another whole doorway for us. But what it is effectively, it basically has 3 levels. So you could go into it starting right out of college. In fact, we have a pathway, the apprenticeship, that allows you to go in even from almost a high school level,
Wow.
and begin to earn credits while you're earn money while you're earning credits, if you will, that apply to your college credits. But then you take 3 levels, right? One of them is the operational level. The next level is the management level, and the top level is the strategic level.
Okay.
It's that top level that CPAs need if they want to move into that evolving CFO role faster.
Okay.
But it prepares you, even without the CPA, it would prepare you for a CFO role globally. We think the CPA adds that ethics and trust foundation, which makes it platinum.
Thank you. Now, can you tell us a bit more? What is in that curriculum of the strategic level? Like, what are some of the topics covered?
So things like digital strategy,
Wow.
um, risk management, all kinds of strategic planning notions, and basically understanding the holistic business enterprise view and how to lead that. So that's where, and what's interesting about the CGMA, because the CMA is a great credential also, the CGMA is all case study work. So you're actually in scenarios while you're building to the exam. So and these scenarios are like real world updated scenarios that you will encounter in the real world lives of CFOs and controllers. So I think that's what makes it a bit unique. It's also very hard and intense, but when people get through it, for instance, one of our members happens to be, he was on our future finance group. He was the CFO of a little retailer in Bentonville, Arkansas called Walmart.
Yeah.
And he's a CIMA member from England. It came over, CFO of Walmart. Next thing you know, after 3 months, he ended up becoming the COO of Sam's Club. And then a couple months later, he's the CEO of Sam's Club. So just to give you an example of where that credential can take you, he's a living example running, one of the largest corporations in the world as with that designation and that background. And he would say that was an essential part of him being able to get to that position. It would be the equivalent of an MBA, but with all the financial acumen built into it. And that's the differentiator.
No, and I totally get it why you would say it's a platinum level because, in my role now, I realize like risk management is huge. Like when you think about the uncertainty and what's going on, like you really need to have that toolkit. I like the idea of the case studies, not just multiple choices. Like you really have to think, where to go because nothing is straightforward when you come out of school, for sure.
Correct.
So I'm curious in your recent conversations with the Fortune 1000 CFOs and now CEOs, what are they losing sleep over right now?
The top issues, we obviously track these top 5 issues constantly with our group by polling them. So need for new skills is really challenging them. But let me put it in context. That rose to number 1 in the last 6 or 7 months. Gen AI was number 2. Number 3 is accelerated digital transformation. And number 4 was innovation and growth. So let's put up all that in context, right? What the CFOs are dealing with is they've got to transform their finance function so they can support innovation and growth in the business, which is then requiring the need for new skills, right? And then AI is just a big turbocharge
Yeah.
on all those trends. So what's keeping them up at night is, how do I deal with this whole playbook of things that I have to do? And then we saw that come out in the Gartner CFO conference, where they talked about what are the top 5 things CFOs are spending their time on. And they tie right to those trends, interestingly enough. Um, it's funny, we just covered this in the town hall meeting, but here's what they're talking about. Metrics, analytics, and reporting, think FP&A, future-oriented stuff, right? Planning, budgeting, and forecasting, future-oriented stuff. Data strategy and management. If they're going to use AI in the enterprise, they got to get a good handle on their data and their financial data, especially. Then AI adoption in finance was number 4. And finally, the 5th one was enterprise growth strategy. So you can see this was as of May at the Gartner CFO conference, supporting exactly what our group came up with, which is why I love our group. The wisdom of the crowd comes through every time, spot on. But that's what's keeping them up at night. It's not one thing, it's the bucket of 5 things. How do I transform fast enough to support innovation and growth in my business? Again, none of that's about financial reporting history. It's all about looking out the windshield.
Yeah, and I noticed a common thing throughout is technology. Like a lot of what you were saying, whether it was from the Gartner Group or what we do at the Future of Finance, it's all around technology, upskilling, reskilling. So I'm curious, how do you find the people to help you upskill your people, right? Because we all learning AI together. Like, how do
Yes,
you? Because the world doesn't stop because we're learning a new thing, right? You still have to do reporting. You better send your if you SEC, the SEC is waiting for you, IRS is waiting for you. So things still have to happen while we're
correct.
trying to think about the future. So curious to hear what you're hearing from them about that balance.
So it's interesting. There was a phrase or a statement that came out of Microsoft a while back because they were going on a transformation journey for their modern finance, right? And they said, I don't know exactly who specifically said it, but the concept is we have to perform while we transform. Because every one of these issues about transformation, everyone would love. I mean, we're doing transformation right now. It would be great if we could shut everything down,
Yes.
transform, get everything right in about 6 months or a year, and then open back up again,
Yeah.
right? That doesn't work that way. So as we know, so we have to figure out how we perform and transform. But then go along with this, right? The upskilling piece, we've been doing all the research on what those skills are at the AICPA and CIMA. And we have a whole portfolio of the T-shaped professional in addition to technical training that we've done forever. But those success skills, we call them power skills, basically to supercharge the finance team. We're doing those curriculums for many of these major companies and beyond. We're offering it through some state societies and other ways. So if anyone wants some ideas on that, just have them hit me up and we'll put them in touch with our sales team, or we could give you a link so they could see where some of those resources are.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing because I can understand why we are all losing sleep over it because in finance and accounting, like the reporting timelines and milestones don't change. Like that's something that has been standard
Right.
forever.
Right. You got it. And that's table stakes. We got to get that right.
Yes, yes. And then we have to think about other things. So for you, what would you say is one trend in finance leadership that's overhyped or one that's underrated?
Okay. I love that question, by the way. You really made me think. So this is what I keep hearing in the market, and it annoys me a bit.
Okay.
So the overhype trend is AI will replace finance and accounting, right? Now, I'm around long enough that I was around when Excel came out and VisiCalc and Lotus. And when that came out, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal of all
Oh
places that
gosh.
said spreadsheets are going to replace the accounting profession.
Wow.
Now, I was like, "Are you kidding me?" Because it was making everybody more productive. We were now doing more scenarios than we ever could before. So next thing you know, after about 3 years, they did an analysis of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the actual finance and accounting jobs increased after the spreadsheets, and the only job that decreased was bookkeeping that went down. I think AI is going to be the same idea because the automation will not replace the strategic decision-making roles. And yes, we want to automate all the mind-numbing, soul-sucking work that we have to do with those transactions and get to what we really know how to do, which is understand the language of business, which is accounting, and then use that for the good of the organization. So that's my take on that overhype thing. It won't replace us, it will augment us. So then the underrated trend is the need for human-centric leadership and talent development. So the more we see automation and AI, the more we need human in the loop, right? And that's the whole point of that idea. So I think no matter what gets automated, people always want to look a human in the eye when you're talking about what's the fate of this company, right? You're not going to want your AI saying you're going to go out of business in 6 months. You're going to want your CFO saying, if we don't do this, we might go out of business. So here's what we're going to do. That's the point, that human judgment and interpretation and the empathy that goes along with that. And that includes the talent development and all those other pieces as we move into that chief value officer role.
Okay. Now, I love what you just said about we'll still need that human touch. But when I'm thinking about the traditional accounting and finance person, we don't necessarily develop those skills in our curriculum, right? So I gave a talk earlier this year about being promoted now what? So you promoted for those technical skills at the very beginning of your career. And then at some point, you're supposed to just shift into leadership, into EQ and empathy and all these things. Curious to hear what was your personal experience when you had to make that shift, because you had to at some point. And what do you typically recommend someone?
So again, what I say, and this was where early on, two things. My network was essential. I could call people and say, how are you dealing with this? Or what are you doing? A lot of the programs that were being offered at the MACPA and AICPA had leadership components to them. So I became an avid reader of leadership and strategy.
Okay.
Tom Peters, Peter Drucker, some of those folks. And so pretty soon I learned, wow, through networks, like for me, it was Twitter in the early days and LinkedIn now. But Twitter and LinkedIn gave me a bigger network. I could connect to more people and watch what they're saying and learn from them. And so by paying attention to all that, you get a nice learning lesson by like looking at your podcast and listen to people that are in the market doing different things. And all you things you're doing with interviewing these thought leaders is giving everyone a great education that if they pay attention, they can use it and they can actually leverage that. And then I supplemented that with formal school. So early on, I saw technology as a big thing. So I went back to University of Baltimore for a IT degree. And I didn't get the whole degree, but I got the technology side of it so I could understand the systems that I was dealing with at the time. And then later on, I went to Johns Hopkins to get a master's in finance with a real estate specialty because in highway construction, we were dealing with real estate developers. It was a big downturn, and I had to understand the economics and the way to leverage our way through that. So it's about thinking about what's going on in your world and where can you start to learn ahead of all that, right? So you've got to start thinking about anticipating where the industry is going and where you might need to go, and then start to learn about that, whether it's informal or formal or classes and curriculum, but whatever it is, get going on that.
And I love that it goes back to the formula you said earlier about learning.
L greater than C squared.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, I'm curious, you spend your career helping others grow. What's the piece of advice that you find yourself giving over and over again that still holds true?
I think it's the basic theme we've been talking about, Wasia, through this whole piece, right? It's get active in your profession. In our case, I would say the associations, AICPA or your local state CPA society, and build your network in the profession and outside the profession via LinkedIn or Twitter or other communities, right? Find your home with a group, find your tribe, if you will. That's our Future of Finance
Hmm.
leadership group that you're part of, and then really leverage that because that's where a lot of great stuff from. But you've got to be good at collaboration and you got to be good at continuing to build your learning and knowledge. So I think the network, collaboration, and continuously building your knowledge base are the key things.
I understand and I see how learning and adapting is so important when you think about growing your career. Now, when you talk about networking, networking can feel awkward because a lot of people on my finance team are introverts. So they always ask me, how do you build those network without get into these events without feeling awkward? Like, do you have a go-to move? Like, how do you get around and really get to build relationships that are really effective both ways?
So I'm a big introvert myself, so I can identify with that. Yeah, I'm a huge introvert. Nobody believes me. I've had to overcome it when I have to get on stage. But I would say that's the beauty actually of social media. So way early on, I learned actually this came from Tom Peters of all people, who said, start blogging, which like that's how I met you, right? You were blogging, and I'm like paying attention. All of a sudden, you go, when someone says something cool, go there and put your point of view, add a comment, but not just a like and a, oh, great, Wassia. Like, here's what I like about what you said, or here's what I would add. Start putting your point of view out there and connect to those people. And believe it or not, pretty soon you'll have that network building. And the other part I like to say is I call it power friending. Remember the old friending thing on Facebook? So anytime you're in a social network, when I connect to Wassia, I'm going to look at your network and say, who else do I know in Wassia's network that I might also know? Or who do I want to know in Wassia's network that I should go and say, click, would you connect to me? Hey, I see we both are connected to Wassia. She's a good person. I'd love to get you in my network too. And when they connect to you, what's interesting about that is people can't differentiate a relationship on social media when they connect to you from a real human relationship in the real world. Let me say that again. They can't differentiate the difference between a social network relationship and a real relationship. Here's how that works. Every time I show up at a meeting and someone there is in my network, they come up to me and say, I know you. And they feel like they know me because they've been following my stuff and we've been connected.
Uh-huh.
And suddenly there's this familiarity that
True.
jump starts that relationship. So what I do anytime I'm going to go to a conference, connect to all the speakers through LinkedIn if I can, and see if I can connect. I also look at anyone I know that's there, the leaders of the conference, any of the people on the committee, connect to them so that when I get there, I can actually feel like I know people and they will feel like they know me. That eases the way for us introverts to get into the conversations.
Oh, I love this strategy. Definitely going to steal that. But then I'm curious, once you get into the conference, okay, because some conferences are huge. Okay. And my husband
Yeah.
is an introvert and he's like, I don't even want to go to the conference because it drains me out. Like, how do you manage your energy? And like, do you have like goals? I'm only going to talk to 5 people or replenish at this time. What's your go-to strategy?
I was never that disciplined. I probably should have been, but for me, it was really about being curious.
Okay.
And I'm curious about what other people are bringing and what the conference people are bringing. And I want to learn. So if it's in that spirit and you connect to someone and say, well, see, I want to know about your journey and what you're up to, everyone will talk about that. And suddenly you'll find those common threads that you can then pull on and create a bigger relationship and a bigger learning as you go on. So for me, it's always what can I be learning from these other people? And when you're in a conference, and you start to hear questions and everything, that's where you start to see the magic happening, right? And you connect to some of those people that are provocative with questions and curious, and the speakers as well. And so that kind of thing, I think, is where I would go.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing. My last question before I let you go. What is your favorite thing to do outside of work?
Well, I was born and raised in Baltimore City, as was my wife, but she's a kindergarten teacher that evolved into running a school farm, actually at my old school and my kids' school at where she teaches. So the school farm produces, it's on 10 acres, it produces thousands of pounds of food that goes to the school kitchen for their
Oh,
lunches, and it
nice.
goes to the Maryland Food Bank to sustain people who can't afford good, fresh food. That has become a passion project. So on the weekends, you'll find me out there guarding the chickens when they're out in the pasture and helping harvest. And in fact, I'll be doing that this weekend with her. So yeah, it's really that it feels good to be out in nature. It grounds you, right? When I'm out there chasing a chicken or a turkey and then helping to harvest and see the from the seed to the final production of the food, it's pretty wild. So that's my kind of favorite thing outside of work.
Oh, that is so good. And I love the mission too. Fresh food. Wow. There is somebody at my workplace that have chickens and every now and then she'll bring a dozen of, she'll give people. And last time she gave me like three. When I opened the carton, the kids were like, these eggs don't all look the same. And yeah,
It's very true.
yeah, and it's hard for me to go back to regular chicken eggs. I'm like, you spoiled me. Now I'll be chasing
Yeah.
you for these farm eggs.
Yeah, and they taste a lot better on
Yes.
top of it, but it's the same thing with the fruits and vegetables, right? They're not all polished and perfect
Yes.
that you get in the supermarket, right? But their
Oh,
taste is
good.
tons better, and yeah, it's pretty cool.
Good for you. Good for you. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Tom. Thank you so much for the work you do at the AICPA in supporting CFOs and finance team throughout the world. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the work you're doing with this podcast, and you're a thought leader in our profession, and we appreciate that, and we love having you involved with our future finance leadership group. So keep it up, and thank you for having me on the show.
Of course. Thank you. And that's it for today's episode of the Diary of a CFO. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to like, review, subscribe, and share with others. Our website is thediaryofacfo.com. That's where you can find all the episodes, access all the guest profiles, see their bios, and their social media links. It is also the place where you can apply to be a guest on the podcast and have information about how you can sponsor the show. As always, if there is any topic you would like me to cover in the future, just email me at ask@thediaryofacfo.com. See you soon.
Wondering if you're ready for the CFO role? Find out with a free CFO readiness scorecard at cfo.scoreapp.com.